The morning sky on Zephyr Prime had turned from blue to angry orange. Ambassador Kethvar stood on the observation deck of the Planetary Council building, watching the dying star that had warmed his world for millions of years. The star was growing, larger each day, swelling like a balloon filled with deadly fire. Soon it would swallow everything his people had ever built. Behind him, the council chamber buzzed with desperate voices. Scientists shared their final calculations while military leaders discussed evacuation plans that everyone knew were impossible. 12 billion Zephyrians lived on this world. The largest ships in their fleet could carry maybe 10,000 people, each. Even if they used every vessel, including cargo ships and mining barges, they could only save a fraction of their population. Kethvar touched the communication device on his wrist. For weeks, he had been sending messages across the galaxy. The same plea went out to every known civilization, every spacefaring race that might have ships to spare. The responses had been polite but firm. No one could help with something this big. The Vorthari had been the first to reply. Their crystalline forms spoke through harmonic vibrations that the translation systems turned into cold, measured words. The Vorthari collective regrets that we cannot assist in this matter. Our vessels are not designed for mass evacuation operations. We wish you well in this difficult time. The energy beings called the Luminar had been even more direct. Their message came as pulses of light that hurt to look at. The logistics of such an operation exceed our capabilities. We advise acceptance of natural stellar cycles. Even the aquatic depths, who lived in the deep oceans of a dozen worlds, had declined. Their bubble-like ships could carry thousands, but they would only take Zephyrians who could adapt to underwater life. Less than 1% of his people could survive in such conditions. Kethvar turned away from the orange sky and walked back into the council chamber. The arguing had stopped. Everyone was looking at him with the same question in their eyes. He had promised them answers. He had told them help would come. But the galaxy's great civilizations had all given the same response. They were sorry, but this was too big, too dangerous, too expensive. Any word from the Harmony Council? Asked General Nixtal, the military commander who had been trying to organize an impossible evacuation. Kethvar shook his head. The Galactic Harmony Council was supposed to be the voice of peace and cooperation among all civilized worlds. They had debated his request for 3 days before sending a formal response. They expressed deep sympathy for the Zephyrian situation, but could not commit resources to such a massive undertaking. They suggested that the Zephyrians might consider voluntary population reduction to make evacuation more manageable. The idea had made Kethvar sick. These were the civilized races of the galaxy. These were the beings who claimed to represent the highest values of peace and cooperation. Yet when faced with the extinction of an entire species, they offered only empty words and horrible suggestions. Dr. Velkan, the chief scientist, stood up slowly. His old body moved with the careful precision of someone who had spent too many sleepless nights running calculations. The star's expansion is accelerating, he said in a quiet voice. We have perhaps 2 standard months before the outer layers of our atmosphere begin to burn away. The chamber fell silent. 2 months to move 12 billion people. It was impossible with their own ships. It was impossible with help from the galaxy's greatest civilizations. It was simply impossible. Far, beyond the edge of Zephyrian space on a small research ship called the UHS Columbia, Dr. Lisa Martinez was having trouble sleeping. The ship was quiet except for the low hum of the life support systems. Most of the crew was asleep, but Lisa couldn't stop thinking about the signals she had been monitoring. Her job was to study cosmic radiation patterns. It was boring work most of the time, but it helped map the galaxy and understand how stars affected the space around them. 3 days ago, she had started picking up unusual transmissions from the direction of the Zephyr system. The signals were strong and repeated on multiple frequencies. Lisa had run the transmissions through the ship's translation computers. What she found kept her awake at night. The signals were distress calls. An entire civilization was about to die, and they were begging anyone who could hear them for help. She had read the responses from other species, the Vorthari, the Luminar, the Depths. Even the Harmony Council. All of them had said no. All of them had reasons why they couldn't help. Some of their reasons even made sense from a practical standpoint. But Lisa couldn't stop thinking about the number. 12 billion people were going to die, and the galaxy was going to let it happen. Lisa walked to the ship's small observatory and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, an entire world was ending. Parents were holding their children and trying to explain why the sky was the wrong color. Scientists were working day and night to find solutions that didn't exist. Leaders were making impossible choices about who might live and who would certainly die. The door behind her slid open with a soft whisper. Captain Jake Morrison stepped into the observatory, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He was a big man with gray hair and kind eyes that had seen too much of the galaxy's dark corners. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, offering her one of the cups. Lisa took the coffee gratefully. "I keep thinking about those signals, about all those people." Jake nodded slowly. "I've been reading the reports too. It's a bad situation, maybe the worst I've ever heard of." "The other species won't help," Lisa said. "They all have excuses. Good excuses maybe, but still excuses." "It would be a massive operation," Jake said carefully. "We're talking about evacuating the entire population of a planet. No one's ever tried anything like that before." Lisa looked at him sharply. "We? Are you thinking what I think you're thinking?" Jake stared out at the stars for a long moment. "I'm thinking about what my grandfather would have said. He was in the old Earth Navy, back during the Water Wars. He used to tell me that the size of a problem doesn't change whether it's right or wrong to help. But we're just one small research ship," Lisa said. "We're not a rescue fleet. We don't even have the authority to commit human resources to something like this." "No," Jake agreed. "But we could send a message. Let them know that someone heard their plea. Someone cares." Lisa felt something stir in her chest. Hope, maybe, or just stubborn human refusal to accept the impossible. The other species all said it couldn't be done. Jake smiled grimly. The other species never lived on Earth. They never had to learn how to survive on a world that tries to kill you every day. They never had to figure out how to keep going when everything says you should give up. Lisa looked back out at the stars. Somewhere in that vast darkness, 12 billion people were running out of time. The galaxy's great civilizations had already decided their fate. But humans had never been particularly good at accepting what others decided was impossible. "Send the message," she said quietly. Jake nodded and headed for the communications console. Within minutes, a new signal was racing across space toward the dying Zephyr system. It was a simple message, transmitted in basic galactic common language. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the human ship Columbia. We have received your distress signal. We are coming to help." On Zephyr Prime, Ambassador Kethvar was packing his personal belongings when his communication device chimed. Another response. To their pleas, probably. Another polite rejection from another advanced civilization. He almost didn't answer it. But something made him touch the device. The message that appeared on the small screen was short and written in awkward, basic language. The species identifier showed something he had never seen before. Humans. From a world called Earth. Kethvar read the message 3 times before he believed it. Someone was coming to help. Someone he had never heard of. From a species not even registered with the Harmony Council. But they were coming. The ambassador rushed to the council chamber, his belongings forgotten. For the first time in weeks, he had something other than despair to report. The stars had finally answered their plea, and the answer had come from the most unlikely source imaginable. Word of humanity's response spread through the galactic communication networks faster than anyone expected. In the crystal spires of the Vorthari homeworld, harmonics buzzed with confusion and barely hidden disdain. Energy beings of the Luminar, collective pulsed with what could only be called amusement. Even the usually quiet depths sent ripples of skeptical laughter through their ocean cities. The humans were coming to help. The humans. The violent primates from the third world of an unremarkable star system. the species that most civilized races crossed the street to avoid when they encountered them in spaceports. They lived on a world so hostile that galactic insurance companies refused to cover visits to their home system. Their planet was classified as a Class O2's death world, a place where the weather could kill you, the animals hunted in packs, and the very ground shook without warning. Ambassador Velthar of the Vorthari Collective stood in the great resonance chamber of their capital city, his crystalline form vibrating with displeasure. Around him, the other members of the collective shared their thoughts through harmonic frequencies that created beautiful music, even as they discussed ugly realities. The humans, Velthar resonated, are known for their violence and their inability to understand proper diplomatic procedure. They will likely make the situation worse. Their ships are primitive, added another voice in the harmony. Crude metal constructions held together with what they call duct tape and wishful thinking. They cannot possibly handle an operation of this magnitude. Similar conversations were happening across the galaxy. The Luminar Collective pulsed with superior energy as they discussed the folly of the human response. They lack the sophistication for such delicate work, their spokesman transmitted. Their brutal evolution on that nightmare world has made them unsuited for civilized rescue operations. But on Earth, in the headquarters of the Human Space Command, a very different conversation was taking place. Admiral Patricia Hayes stood before a holographic display showing the Zephyr system, surrounded by officers who were already making the impossible possible. "How many ships can we get there in 2 weeks?" she asked. Colonel Sam Davis, the logistics coordinator, looked up from his calculations. "If we convert every available cargo hauler, mining ship, and passenger liner, maybe 200 vessels. That's assuming we strip out everything non-essential and pack them with basic life support. Crew requirements? We'll need volunteers," said Captain Linda Roberts, the personnel chief. "Lots of them. The radiation levels near that dying star will be dangerous even for us. Most other species would be dead in minutes." Admiral Hayes nodded. Humans had evolved on a world where radiation was just another hazard to survive. Solar flares, cosmic rays, and radioactive ore had been constant dangers throughout human history. What would kill other species would just give humans a bad day. "Send out the call," she ordered. "Every merchant captain, every mining crew, every transport pilot, whoever wanted to do something that mattered. Tell them we're going to save 12 billion lives." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, volunteers were flooding into spaceports across human space. Cargo ship captains who usually hauled grain and manufactured goods were stripping their holds to make room for passengers. Mining vessel crews were welding extra life support systems into their sturdy ships. Even passenger liners that normally carried tourists were being converted into rescue ships. Commander Alex Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the converted cargo hauler Mercy Run, watching as his mismatched fleet prepared to jump to hyperspace. His force looked nothing like the elegant formations of other galactic fleets. Human ships were built for function, not beauty. They were blocky, practical vessels covered in sensor arrays, communication dishes, and emergency repair patches. They looked exactly like what they were, working ships designed to operate in dangerous conditions by people who couldn't afford to replace them if they broke. "Fleet status report," Alex called out. Lieutenant Ben Parker, his communications officer, looked up from his console. "All ships report ready for jump, sir. We've got cargo haulers, mining ships, passenger transports, and 3 deep space construction vessels. Total capacity for this wave is approximately 400,000 evacuees." Alex nodded. It was a start, but barely a drop in the ocean compared to what they needed to save. Still, it was 400,000 people who would live instead of die. That had to count for something. "All ships, this is Rodriguez. Jump in 3, 2, 1, execute." The human fleet vanished into hyperspace, beginning the journey to a dying star system where 12 billion people were running out of time. 3 days later, the human ships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Zephyr system. What they found waiting for them was not what anyone had expected. The system was crowded with ships. Not rescue ships, but observer vessels from every major galactic civilization. The crystalline formations of the Vorthari, the energy-wrapped spheres of the Luminar, the bubble-like constructs of the depths, and dozens of others. They had all come to watch the Zephyrians die. "This is Commander Rodriguez of the Human Rescue Fleet," Alex transmitted on all frequencies. "We are here to begin evacuation operations." The response came immediately from a Vorthari vessel, its harmonics translated into cold, precise words. "Human vessel, you are entering a designated observation zone. Please maintain safe distance from the stellar phenomena." "We're not here to observe," Alex replied. "We're here to save lives." A new voice joined the conversation, this time from a Luminar energy ship. "The stellar radiation in this system exceeds safe limits for biological entities. Your primitive shielding cannot protect you." Lieutenant Commander Maria Santos, who was monitoring the sensor readings, looked up from her console. "Sir, they're right about the radiation. It's bad and getting worse, but our ships can handle it." Alex smiled, grimly. Humans had been dealing with radiation since the first cave dweller got too much sun. Their ships might look primitive to other species, but they were built by people who understood that space was trying to kill you every moment of every day. "All human ships, proceed to evacuation stations," Alex ordered. "Ignore the tourist boats." Watching galactic fleets were stunned as the human vessels moved deeper into the system, heading directly toward the dangerous radiation zones near the dying star. Their ships should have been destroyed within hours. Instead, they kept flying, protected by thick hulls, redundant shielding, and the kind of overbuilt engineering that only came from a species that had learned the hard way that backup systems needed backup systems. On the surface of Zephyr Prime, Ambassador Kethavar stood in the spaceport control center, watching the display screens with amazement. The human ships were actually coming. They were flying through radiation that had forced all the other observers to retreat, and they were still coming. "Incoming transmission from the human fleet," reported the communications technician. "Put it through," Kethavar ordered. A human face appeared on the main screen. The woman had short brown hair and tired eyes, but her voice was steady and professional. "This is Lieutenant Commander Santos of the Human Rescue Fleet. We're here to get your people out. Where do you need us to start?" Kethavar felt something he hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. "Commander Santos, we have evacuation centers established in all major cities, but the radiation levels—" "We can handle the radiation," Maria interrupted. "That's what we do. We live on a world that's been trying to kill us since day one. A little stellar radiation isn't going to stop us." Over the next few hours, something unprecedented began to happen in the Zephyr system. Human ships, looking like flying scrap heaps, compared to the elegant vessels of other species, began landing in the most dangerous zones on the planet. They operated in radiation fields that would have killed any other species, their crews working in environmental suits that were crude but effective. Engineer Tony Blake led the first ground team off the cargo hauler Hope's Dream. He looked around, at the orange sky and the panicked crowds of Zephyrians waiting for evacuation. "Okay, people," he called to his crew. "Let's show the galaxy how Deathworlders get things done." The watching galactic fleets recorded everything as the humans began their impossible rescue mission. Their ships should have failed. Their equipment should have broken down. Their crews should have been dead from radiation poisoning. Instead, something else happened. The humans adapted, they improvised. They found ways to make their crude equipment work in conditions that would have stopped more advanced technology cold. When their fancy computers failed, they used manual controls. When their sophisticated sensors were blinded by radiation, they used their eyes and their instincts. Most importantly, they didn't give up. While the civilized races of the galaxy watched from a safe distance, the barbaric humans from the death world called Earth flew into hell itself to save people they had never met. The evacuation had begun. The Zephyrian star was dying faster than anyone had predicted. What the scientists thought would take 2 months was happening in weeks. The orange sky had turned deep red, and the radiation readings were climbing every hour. On the observation decks of the distant galactic fleet, sophisticated sensors recorded the stellar collapse with scientific interest, while their crews maintained safe distances. The human ships stayed close to the planet. Dr. Amy Foster stood in the medical bay of the transport ship New Dawn, working frantically to modify human life support systems. The Zephyrians breathed a different mixture of gases than humans, and their body temperature ran several degrees cooler. She had been working for 36 hours straight, surviving on coffee and determination. "How many more can we fit?" asked Captain Steve Carter as he entered the medical bay. His uniform was stained with coolant fluid and his hands were covered in burns from emergency repairs. Amy looked up from the breathing apparatus she was modifying. "If we pack them in tight, maybe 2,000 more. But Steve, the radiation levels are getting dangerous even for us. The other species pulled back another 1,000,000 kilometers yesterday." Steve nodded grimly. The elegant ships of the Vorthari, Luminar, and Depths were now barely visible on the long-range sensors. They had equipment that could record everything from vast distances, but they couldn't get close enough to actually help. Only the human ships remained in the dangerous zone near the dying star. "The northern continent evacuation is falling behind schedule," Steve said. "There are still 3 million people there and the radiation storms are getting worse." Amy set down her tools and looked at the captain. She had known Steve for 5 years, had served with him on cargo runs to the outer rim. She had never seen him look this tired or this worried. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I'm thinking about volunteering my ship for the northern run," Steve said quietly. "The radiation there is twice as bad as anywhere else. The Zephyrian ships can't operate in those conditions anymore." Amy felt her stomach drop. The northern continent of Zephyr Prime was the most dangerous place in the system right now. The dying star's radiation was focused there by the planet's magnetic field, creating conditions that would kill most species within minutes. Even humans would need constant medical treatment to survive more than a few hours of exposure. "Steve, that's suicide," she said. "Maybe," he replied, "but 3 million people are going to die if someone doesn't go get them." Before Amy could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. The bridge communicator crackled to life with Chief Petty Officer Rick Murphy's voice. "Captain, to the bridge immediately. We've got a problem." Steve ran to the bridge with Amy right behind him. What they found there made both of them stop in their tracks. The main display showed a massive solar flare erupting from the dying star, a wall of radiation and plasma racing toward the planet at incredible speed. "How long until it hits?" Steve asked. Rick checked his instruments. 18 hours, sir. Maybe less. What about the evacuation ships? Most of the human fleet is already overloaded and heading for the jump points. But there are still 12 ships on the surface loading refugees. If that flare hits while they're still down there..." Steve didn't need Rick to finish the sentence. The solar flare would cook anything on the planet's surface. The Zephyrians had underground shelters, but the human ships would be sitting ducks. "Get me a channel to all human vessels," Steve ordered. Within minutes, the faces of 12 ship captains appeared on the communication screen. They were a mixed group of cargo haulers, mining ship commanders, and transport pilots. Most of them looked like they hadn't slept in days. All of them were still loading refugees as fast as they could. "Ladies and gentlemen," Steve began, "we've got a massive solar flare coming in hot. You need to get off that planet now." Captain Helen Davis of the mining ship Iron Will spoke up first. "We've got 4,000 Zephyrians aboard, and room for maybe 1,000 more. There are still crowds at the spaceport." "Same here," added Captain Bob Wright from the cargo hauler Lucky Strike. "These people have been waiting in line for days. If we leave now..." "If you don't leave now, you'll all be dead," Steve interrupted. "That flare will hit in less than 18 hours. The captains looked at each other through their communication screens. They were all thinking the same thing. They could save the people already on their ships, but thousands more would be left behind. It was an impossible choice, the kind that kept commanders awake at night for the rest of their lives. Dr. Lisa Martinez appeared on Steve's screen from her position aboard the Columbia, which was serving as the fleet coordinator. "I think I might have an idea," she said. "It's crazy and probably won't work, but it's better than nothing." "Let's hear it," Steve said. Lisa took a deep breath. "What if we don't try to outrun the flare? What if we use it?" The other captains stared at her like she had lost her mind. Rick Murphy raised an eyebrow. "Doc, that flare is going to fry everything in this system." "Not everything," Lisa said. "The flare will create a massive electromagnetic pulse, but it We'll also create a temporary corridor through the star's outer corona. If we time it right, we could use the flare's energy to boost our ships through the worst radiation zones. Amy Foster, who had been listening from the medical bay, joined the conversation. Lisa, you're talking about flying directly into a solar flare. Our ships are tough, but they're not that tough. Actually, they might be, Lisa replied. Human ships are built to operate in conditions that would destroy other vessels. We've got thick hulls, redundant shielding, and the kind of overbuilt engineering that comes from living on a death world. If anyone can survive a trip through a solar flare, it's us. Steve looked at the radiation readings on his screen. The numbers were already at levels that would have forced any other species to retreat months ago. But the human ships were still flying, still working, still saving lives. Maybe Lisa was right. Maybe they could do the impossible one more time. What would we need to do? He asked. Lisa's fingers flew over her console as she pulled up calculations. We'd need to modify our shields to create a temporary protective barrier, use controlled explosions to clear a path through the worst radiation, and we'd need ships positioned at specific points to guide the evacuation convoy through the flare. That means some ships would have to stay behind, Steve said quietly. In the most dangerous positions. Yeah, Lisa admitted. It does. The communication channel fell silent as 12 captains considered what Lisa was proposing. They were talking about flying into the heart of a solar flare to save people they had never met. It was insane. It was impossible. It was exactly the kind of thing humans did when there were no other options left. Captain Davis spoke first. Count me in. The Iron Will has the heaviest shielding in the fleet. We can take point position. One by one, the other captains volunteered. For the most dangerous rescue mission in galactic history, they would use the dying star's own death throes to save the last refugees on Zephyr Prime. In the distant observation fleet, the galactic civilizations watched the human ships with growing amazement. The sophisticated sensors of the Vorthari recorded impossible readings as human vessels continued to operate in conditions that should have destroyed them hours ago. The energy beings of the Luminar Collective pulsed with what could only be called confusion as they observed the crude human technology somehow succeeding where their advanced systems would have failed. Ambassador Velthar, of the Vorthari Crystalline Collective, transmitted to his fellows. Their ships should not be functional. The radiation levels exceed all safe parameters. Perhaps, resonated another voice in the collective, we have miscalculated what constitutes safe parameters for a species that evolved on a world where safety was never an option. On the surface of Zephyr Prime, the last groups of refugees watched the red sky grow brighter as the solar flare approached. They had been told that ships were coming for them, human ships that would fly through hell itself to bring them home. Most of them didn't believe it was possible, but in the distance they could see the stubborn lights of human vessels refusing to leave. The Deathworlders had come to save them, and they weren't giving up now. The flare was 12 hours away, and closing fast. The real test was about to begin. The solar flare hit Zephyr Prime like the fist of an angry god. Captain Steve Carter watched from the bridge of the New Dawn as the wall of plasma and radiation swept across the planet's surface. The sky turned white-hot, then blazing gold, then a color that had no name because no living thing should have been able to see it. His ship shook like a leaf in a hurricane as electromagnetic pulses hammered against their shields. Shields holding at 60%, called out Rick Murphy from his engineering station. Hull temperature rising but still in the green. Steve gripped the arms of his command chair as another wave of radiation washed over them. Any other ship in the galaxy would have been vaporized by now. Hell, any other ship would never have been crazy enough to try this in the first place, but human ships were built by people who understood that sometimes the only way out was straight through. Position report, Steve ordered. Lieutenant Sarah Bell, his navigator, looked up from her instruments, with eyes wide with disbelief. Sir, we're actually inside the solar flare. The radiation corridor is forming just like Dr. Martinez predicted. On the surface below, the last evacuation ships were racing against time itself. Captain Helen Davis pushed the Iron Will through, radiation levels that should have melted her ship's hull. Her cargo holds were packed with 5,000 Zephyrians, twice her ship's safe capacity. The extra life support systems that Dr. Foster had jury-rigged were working overtime, recycling air that was already thin and getting thinner. "Engineering, how are those shields holding?" Helen called out. Her chief engineer, a grizzled veteran named Pete Johnson, looked up from a control panel that was sparking and smoking. "Shields are down to 40% and falling. The radiation is cooking our electronics faster than we can repair them." Helen nodded grimly. She had known this was a one-way trip when she volunteered. The Iron Will was the toughest ship in the human fleet, designed to operate in asteroid fields and radiation zones that would kill anything else. If her ship couldn't make it through this, nothing could. "All passengers secure?" she asked. "Packed, in like sardines, but they're secure," Pete replied. "The Zephyrians are scared out of their minds, but they're trusting us to get them home." Home. Helen almost laughed at the irony. These people's home was being consumed by their own sun. The humans were taking them to refugee camps on distant worlds, places they had never seen and might never feel comfortable in. But it was life instead of death, and sometimes that was the best you could hope for. The communication system crackled with Dr. Martinez's voice from the Columbia. "All ships, prepare for Phase 2. We're going to use controlled explosions to clear a path through the worst radiation zones." Lieutenant Colonel Janet Price heard the transmission from the cockpit of her fighter ship, the Dagger. She led a squadron of 12 small, fast vessels that had volunteered for the most dangerous part of the mission. They would fly ahead of the evacuation ships, using their weapons to detonate charges in precise patterns that would create temporary safe corridors through the flare. "Dagger Squadron, this is Price. Form up on me. We're going to punch a hole through hell itself." The fighter pilots acknowledged her orders with voices that were steady, despite the impossible situation they faced. These were men and women who had volunteered to fly into a solar flare because someone had to, and they were the only ones crazy enough to try. Janet's wingman, Lieutenant Tom Baker, pulled his ship alongside hers. "Colonel, our instruments are going crazy. I can barely tell which way's up." "Then we fly by instinct," Janet replied. "It's what humans do best." The fighter squadron dove deeper into the flare, their small ships dancing between waves of plasma that could have powered entire cities. They fired their weapons in carefully calculated patterns, creating explosions that cleared paths through the worst radiation zones. It was like trying to dig tunnels through fire using nothing but determination and hope. Behind them, the evacuation ships followed the corridors that the fighters were creating. Captain Bob Wright guided the Lucky Strike through a passage that Janet's squadron had carved just minutes before. His ship was loaded with refugees and supplies, moving at the maximum speed his overloaded engines could manage. "This is insane," muttered his co-pilot Mike Torres. "We're flying through the middle of a solar flare. This shouldn't be possible." "Tell that to the 5,000 people in our cargo hold," Bob replied. "They don't care if it's impossible. They just want to live." The human ships pushed deeper into the flare, following paths that existed only because other humans were creating them with controlled explosions and desperate courage. Their equipment failed constantly. Their shields dropped to dangerous levels. Their hull temperatures rose to points that should have melted their ships into slag. But they kept flying. Dr. Lisa Martinez watched the impossible rescue unfold from her position on the Columbia. Her calculations had predicted this might work, but seeing it happen was something else entirely. The human ships were operating in conditions that violated every safety protocol ever written. They were succeeding through pure stubborn refusal to accept defeat. "Lisa," called Captain Jake Morrison from his command chair, "we're getting reports that some of the evacuation ships are falling behind. Their engines can't handle the overload." Lisa checked her instruments. 3 ships were indeed lagging behind the main convoy. The cargo hauler Second Chance, the transport Ocean's Dream, and the mining ship Hard Rock were all showing engine problems. If they fell too far behind, they would be caught in the worst part of the flare when the corridor collapsed. "I have an idea," Lisa said, "but it's going to require the Columbia to take the most dangerous position. Jake looked at her with tired eyes that had seen too much in the past few weeks. What do you need? We use our ship as a radiation shield, Lisa explained. Position the Columbia between the lagging ships and the worst of the flare. It will give them the extra protection they need to make it through. Jake was quiet for a moment, considering what she was proposing. Using the Columbia as a shield meant exposing their own ship to radiation levels that would probably destroy them. It was asking his crew to sacrifice their lives for strangers. All hands, this is the captain, Jake announced over the ship's intercom. Dr. Martinez has a plan to save the ships that are falling behind. It means putting ourselves in extreme danger. Anyone who wants to object can speak up now. The bridge fell silent. Then Rick Murphy spoke up from his engineering station. Sir, we didn't come this far to leave people behind now. One by one, the other crew members voiced their agreement. They had volunteered for this mission, knowing it might be a one-way trip. They weren't going to change their minds now. Take us to the danger zone, Jake ordered. The Columbia moved between the failing ships and the heart of the solar flare, using its bulk to shield the smaller vessels from the worst radiation. The ship's hull temperature soared past safe limits. Systems failed throughout the vessel. The radiation readings climbed to levels that would have killed any other species instantly. Sergeant Major Dan Cooper led the damage control teams through corridors filled with smoke and sparks, patching, hull breaches, and rerouting power around failed systems. His teams worked without protective gear because there wasn't any equipment that could protect against this level of radiation. They were surviving on human endurance and the kind of genetic resistance that came from evolving on a world where background radiation was just another hazard. Hull breach on Deck 7, Dan called into his communicator. We need emergency patches now. His teams ran through corridors where the metal walls were glowing from heat, carrying equipment that was already failing from radiation exposure. They welded patches over holes in the hull while standing in radiation fields that should have killed them in seconds. They kept working because people were counting on them. The evacuation convoy pushed through the final phase of the solar flare, human ships creating paths for other human ships while the galaxy's civilized races watched from safe distances. It was the most dangerous rescue mission in recorded history, attempted by the species that everyone else considered too primitive and violent for civilized company. As the convoy finally broke free of the worst radiation zones, emergency alarms were sounding on half the human ships. Systems were failing. Crews were exhausted beyond endurance. But they had done it. They had flown through hell itself and brought 12 billion souls to safety. The price had been higher than anyone wanted to count. The Zephyrian star finally died 3 hours after the last human ship cleared the radiation zone. Dr. Lisa Martinez watched from the medical bay of the Columbia as the star collapsed into itself, then exploded outward in a brilliant flash that lit up half the galaxy. Where a living world had orbited just days before, there was now only empty space and expanding clouds of glowing gas. 12 billion people had called that world home. Now they were scattered across a dozen refugee camps, alive because humans had refused to let them die alone. Lisa looked down at her hands. They were shaking and she couldn't make them stop. The radiation exposure had been worse than anyone had predicted. Half the human fleet was running on emergency power and jury-rigged systems. Dozens of crew members were in medical bays across the fleet, fighting radiation sickness with treatments that might not be enough. Captain Jake Morrison appeared in the doorway of the medical bay. His face was pale and his uniform was stained with coolant fluid, but he was alive. That was more than many could say. How many did we lose? Lisa asked quietly. Jake was silent for a long moment. 43 ships didn't make it out of the system. The Iron Will, Second Chance, Hard Rock, and 40 others. Best estimate is 800 crew members. Lisa felt something break inside her chest. 800 people had died saving strangers they had never met. They had flown into hell itself because someone needed to, and they had paid the ultimate price for their courage. What about the Dagger Squadron? Janet Price made it out, but we lost 6 of her pilots. They stayed behind to clear the final corridor for the evacuation ships. Jake's voice was steady, but Lisa could see the pain in his eyes. They saved thousands of lives with that last run, News of the human sacrifice spread through the galaxy, faster than the light from the dying star. In the crystal cities of the Vorthari, harmonics fell silent as the collective tried to process what they had witnessed. The energy beings of the Luminar dimmed their brightness in something that might have been shame. Even the proud aquatic depths sent quiet ripples through their ocean worlds as they contemplated the magnitude of human courage. But the biggest shock came from the Zephyrians themselves. Ambassador Kethvar stood before the emergency session of the Galactic Harmony Council, his blue skin still bearing the radiation burns he had received during the evacuation. Around him, representatives from every major civilization in the galaxy waited to hear his formal request for aid in resettling his people. Instead, they got something none of them had expected. Honored members of the council, Kethvar began, the Zephyrian people thank you for your expressions of sympathy during our time of crisis. However, we are not here today to request aid from the Harmony Council. Confused murmurs rippled through the assembly. Velthar of the Vorthari Crystalline Collective resonated with puzzlement. Ambassador, if you are not requesting aid, then why have you called this session? Kethavar straightened his shoulders and looked directly at the council members who had refused to help when his people were dying. We are here to formally withdraw our application for membership in the Galactic Harmony Council. The Zephyrian people have chosen to join the Terran Alliance instead. The chamber erupted in shocked harmonics, energy pulses, and aquatic turbulence. The Terran Alliance was barely recognized as a legitimate government by most galactic civilizations. It consisted of humanity and 3 small colonies of beings who preferred human company to the refined society of the galaxy's elder races. This is highly irregular, pulsed the Luminar representative. The Terran Alliance lacks the resources and infrastructure to support refugee populations of this magnitude. You are mistaken, Kethvar replied calmly. The Terran Alliance has already demonstrated that they possess something far more valuable than resources or infrastructure. They have the will to act when action is needed. Admiral Patricia Hayes, representing humanity at the council session, stood up slowly. She was one of the few humans who had been invited to address the Galactic Harmony Council, and she looked distinctly uncomfortable in the elegant chamber surrounded by beings who considered her species to be barely civilized. The Terran Alliance formally accepts the Zephyrian people as full members, she announced. We have already established temporary colonies on 6 worlds, with permanent settlements planned for another 12. The transition will not be easy, but no one will be abandoned. Velthar's crystalline form vibrated with what could only be called indignation. Admiral Hayes, your alliance lacks the sophisticated infrastructure necessary for such an undertaking. The Zephyrians would be better served by joining established galactic civilization. Admiral Hayes looked at the Vorthari representative with eyes that had seen too much death and too much sacrifice. With respect, Ambassador Velthar, where was your sophisticated infrastructure when 12 billion people were about to die? Where were your advanced ships when the rescue corridors needed to be carved through a solar flare? The chamber fell silent. It was a question that every member of the council had been avoiding, but could no longer ignore. The Human Alliance may not have the most advanced technology, Hayes continued, but we have something that seems to be in short supply among the galaxy's civilized races. We show up when people need help. The debate that followed lasted for hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The Zephyrians had made their choice, and nothing the Harmony Council could say would change their minds. They had seen which species was willing to die for strangers, and which species was willing to watch from a safe distance while entire civilizations burned. 3 months later, Dr. Lisa Martinez stood on the observation deck of the space station New Zephyr, watching construction ships build the first permanent settlement for the refugee population. The station orbited a blue-green world that the humans had designated as suitable for Zephyrian colonization. It wasn't their original homeworld, but it was a place where they could build new lives. Captain Jake Morrison joined her at the observation window, moving slowly because of the radiation damage he had sustained during the rescue. The doctor said he would live, but his flying days were over. He didn't seem to mind. There were other ways to serve. How are the integration programs going? He asked. Lisa smiled for the first time in months. Better than expected. Zephyrian engineering skills are complementing human construction techniques beautifully. They're teaching us things about power systems that we never knew, and we're showing them how to build things that won't break when the universe tries to destroy them. Any word from the Harmony Council? They're still debating whether to formally recognize the expanded Terran Alliance, Lisa replied. 3 more species have submitted applications to join us since the Zephyrian evacuation. Apparently, word is spreading that humans don't abandon their allies. Jake nodded slowly. The galaxy was changing. The great civilizations that had ruled through advanced technology and sophisticated diplomacy were discovering that there were things more powerful than either. Loyalty, courage, the willingness to risk everything for people you had never met. The door behind them opened and Ambassador Kethvar entered the observation deck. His radiation burns had healed, but the scars remained as a reminder of the day his people had almost died. He carried a small crystal device that glowed with soft blue light. "Dr. Martinez, Captain Morrison," he said with a formal bow. "I wanted to personally deliver this to you." "What is it?" Lisa asked. "A memory crystal," Kethvar explained. "It contains the complete history of Zephyr Prime, from our earliest records to the final day. Our artists, our music, our literature, our scientific discoveries, everything that made us who we are." He placed the crystal in Lisa's hands. It was warm to the touch and pulsed with gentle light. "We have given copies to every human ship that participated in the evacuation," Kethvar continued. "Your people saved our lives, but more than that, you saved our culture. You ensured that Zephyr Prime will never be truly forgotten." Lisa felt tears running down her cheeks as she held the crystal. It was a small thing, barely larger than her fist, but it contained the soul of an entire civilization. A civilization that existed now only because humans had refused to accept the impossible. "The stars remember everything," Kethvar said quietly. "They remember the civilizations that rise and fall, the species that flourish and fade, the moments when courage triumphs over fear. When the historians of the galaxy write about this time, they will remember that the Zephyrians pleaded with the stars for salvation." He looked out the window at the ships still bringing refugees to their new homes, human vessels working alongside Zephyrian craft in perfect cooperation, and they will remember that the Deathworlders answered. Outside the observation window, the stars shone with ancient light, witnesses to the birth of a new alliance between species that had learned the most important lesson in the galaxy. When people are in trouble, you don't ask if it's possible to help. You just help. The universe is vast and cold and dangerous, filled with dying stars and impossible challenges. But somewhere in that darkness, there are beings who refuse to let others face the night alone. Sometimes that makes all the difference.